Quite often there are cylindrical elements turned on a wood lathe used in classic furniture. So you can see some examples here. Mostly they are used as legs for chairs, tables, sofas, cabinets, etc. So here's a pretty simple example. It started probably with a square blank. Turn the profile over here and here. And that's basically it. No decorative carvings, no any other details, just basic turning on a lathe. Sometimes on classic furniture there are some added details like fluting over here. You can see these recesses around the leg. And that's also pretty simple to make. Here's another example with fluted legs. Sometimes you have to use some advanced techniques to create elements like spirals or different carvings on top of the cylindrical leg. Okay, these spirals can sometimes be in form of fluting. So this can also be a bit tricky to create in 3D Max, but I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so basically the variations of this style are limitless, but you have to know some basic principles on how to approach modeling something like this. Okay, so the first thing you have to know how to do is how to create a basic turned profile. And the easiest way to do that is by using the lathe modifier. I'm just going to quickly draw a profile line, and I'm going to revolve it around its axis to create my object. Usually if you're modeling something specific, you can just put your photo as the viewport background and trace the lines from that. I'm just going to create a random profile here. And once you'll have the profile ready, you can create the 3D shape by using the lathe modifier. Alright. And as you can see, the axis of the lathe is offset. You can go and activate the sub-object by pressing 1 or selecting it here in the modifier list. And you can move it until you have the center in the correct place. Alright, if the proportions look wrong, you can easily turn on the end preview and adjust the points until you have something more natural looking. So let's say we have a leg like this. Okay, that may be a bit too thick on top. Alright, and there's our leg. So this is the most basic thing you can create. Make sure you increase the segments to a larger number until you get a smooth result. And it's probably a good idea to chamfer these vertices over here that are sharp. Okay, that's just one of them. Don't have any more on this model. And I'm just going to chamfer it, and the edge looks much more natural now. Right? Okay, so that's the basic method of creating a lathe turned object with 3D Max. So how do we create something that is segmented? Like this, for example. Let's say we want some 8 segments. Well, there are a few methods. One of them is still using the lathe, but reducing the number of segments to the correct number you need. Okay, so maybe let's try 8 or 6 to see the effect better. And as you can see, the result looks a bit weird since we have these smoothing issues here. But you can just turn off the smooth option of the lathe modifier. Add edit poly. And I want to chamfer these long edge loops, just to make them look more natural. Right. And now to make the whole thing smooth, I add the smooth modifier and enable the auto smooth option. Okay, and that's the segmented version of the same model. So again, that's pretty simple to create and easily adjustable. Alright. If you want to add some decorative details, like here for example, this can be a bit more tricky, and what I recommend is making a copy first. And it's much easier to just adjust one of the segments and make the rest created automatically. So you can do that by first centering the pivot point to the center of the object. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an edit poly modifier. I'm going to select these polys, expand the selection until I get to the midpoint of the seam, like this. Press Ctrl I to invert my selection, and I'm just gonna get rid of everything else. So all that's left is this one segment. And now I can easily modify it. For example, let's make an inset over here. And let's extrude it inwards. And chamfer this outer edge. Right. So let's say it looks good and you want to create the rest of the parts and the rest of the sides, so you just go to Tools, Array, set it to rotate on the Z-axis a total of 360 degrees, and set the number of segments or copies to 6. Press Preview, see how it looks, make sure it's set to instance, press OK, and you have the rest of the segments created automatically. Now let's say I decided I want to add some more detail here. I'm just going to add another edit poly, just in case. Insert it like this and extrude inwards. Right. And finally, let's load the selection and chamfer this edge. Okay, looks good. Let's smooth it. And let's say we are happy with our changes and we want to attach these parts back together. And that's also easy to do. Just isolate your selection, convert everything to editable poly, and attach together. right? And you can make sure it's not broken into elements by selecting all the vertices and welding them at 0.01. Basically the smallest possible value you can choose. And now when you select elements, it's one element. There are no seams, no splits. All right. And that's a simple but useful technique to use on segmented turnings that you need to adjust multiple parts of simultaneously. It gets really helpful when you have more pieces than 6. For example, you have almost round with 60 pieces and you need to adjust just one slice or 2 slices of that, and you can do that. You just have to calculate how many copies to use with the array tool. Right, now I'm going to show you how to add some fluting to this model. Let's start with a copy, collapse it to editable poly. And there's a very useful extended primitive in 3D Max. It's called the capsule. And you can just create something like a capsule. Rotate it like this. Collapse to editable poly and extend down over here. Maybe let's taper it a little bit. Let's make this part a bit smaller on the bottom. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the ProBoolean tool to just cut out the shape from our original leg. First we need to make some copies. Again, that's easy to do. First thing you have to do is center your pivot point on the leg. So I'm just going to do it manually, or you can use the align tool for that as well. Okay, and then use the array tool and set up the number of segments you want to cut out, or the fluting. Okay, you can use the preview to see how it looks. Maybe let's increase it one more. Okay, 2 more. That's good. Collapse to editable poly. And just using the compound objects ProBoolean, you can easily pick those out like this. And the result looks pretty good. Well, the mesh is very hard to edit afterwards, but sometimes it doesn't matter, so what I recommend is doing this step as the last step only, when you have the model completely ready and just need to add the fluting. That's when you would probably use ProBoolean. Okay, and just to get rid of these weird smoothing issues, I'm gonna add an edge loop here with my slice plane tool. And you can see these edges going here in different directions, and when I move the slice plane down, you can see that it becomes much less visible. And you can do the same part, the same thing on the bottom part, but it's pretty tiny over there, so it's probably wouldn't be too visible anyways. Alright. And the nice thing about booleans is that once you do the boolean operation and add an edit poly modifier, the thing you have selected is the border of the cut. So this can be pretty useful if you want to try and chamfer the newly created edges. Most of the time I find it's not necessary, since these edges tend to be pretty hard in real life as well. But you can try to chamfer them slightly if you wish. Okay, just a little bit. Alright, so that's how you add the fluting. And now I'm going to show you how to add the square element you have here. And at the first glance it looks pretty simple, just create a box or something. And sometimes it really is that simple, but in this case it's a bit more tricky. You have a box, but the corners are rounded. Okay, so let's say we start with a box. And we want to round the corners. And you have a couple of options here. So first one I'm going to show you is by using the FFD modifier. This is not an exact method and the results will not be perfect, but it can be pretty quick to use. So what you do is you want to add more segments like this, and some segments across them as well. And then you add an edit poly modifier. Let's say we're gonna round this part. So we select these vertices and add the FFD modifier, FFD 3x3x3. The reason we selected these vertices is that we want the FFD modifier to work only on them and leave the rest of the object alone. And I'm just gonna select these center points, basically all the points except the corners. I'm just gonna move them up like this. And it's a pretty quick way to get a similar looking result as you have in this example, but it's not really perfect, and in real life it looks a bit different. To get a perfect result you need to use the Boolean tools again. Right, and the other method I want to show you is a bit more accurate. I'm just going to copy this over here, get rid of my modifiers. And let's reduce the segments back to 1. And what I want to do is I want to rotate the box 45 degrees. So the widest part is facing directly towards me. As you can see, as you rotate, this is the widest it can get. Right, and then you take a line tool and make a profile for a nice rounded cut. It's something pretty simple like this. Okay, good. Move the pivot points to center of the box. Okay. And using the lathe modifier, you can get a result like this. Okay, set the segments pretty high. Okay, 64 will work. Make sure your line has enough interpolation steps. I'm going to increase them to 32, so the final result is very smooth. And now I'm just going to collapse these both objects to editable polys. And using Pro Boolean, I'm going to make a cut and cut off everything outside this rounded line. So make sure it's set to the subtraction mode. I click Start Picking and pick your lathed profile. And there's your result. And this is probably a much more accurate representation of what you would get on a real wood turning lathe. And to make the other half, you just use the symmetry modifier. Or if the other half is a different profile, you create another profile and cut it off with the Boolean tools. And as you can see, they are a bit similar in look, but pretty different at the same time. Okay, and to get rid of these hard edges, you can simply use V-Ray Edges texture in the bump slot on your material or something like that. Since these Boolean objects are pretty hard to modify with poly modeling tools. You can try adding Edit Poly. Selecting the edges, it already has the borders selected, but it's a bit tricky to chamfer them, and you probably get some glitches if you try. First of all, the results are not too even. But if you use a pretty low value, it might be okay. So yeah, with a very small value, you can do it like this as well. If you want a larger chamfer, you have to go in manually, and that's a bit tricky. Then you would probably use a low resolution profile and edit the resulting mesh manually to add some support edges and stuff like that. But most of the time, these edges are pretty sharp, so this works well, and it's pretty quick as well. Right. So let's look at some spiral elements. Spirals can be a bit difficult to make. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and create something like this. Alright, so let's set up our background. And here we go. Okay. So to make a spiral, I would probably do it like this. I would create a single twist. And for that you can use the helix tool. Okay, let's rotate it vertically and adjust the parameters manually. Make sure the radius is set to the same value for 1 and 2, and set the height and the number of turns. Okay. So it looks like something like this might be accurate. Right, let's convert to editable spline. And since you can't really control the interpolation steps on the helix, that's one negative side of this tool. You have to go in manually and reduce the number of segments like this. I'm just selecting every other point. And deleting them. Okay. and you can give it a profile. Let's try a larger thickness. Maybe a bit more, like this. And I'm going to select the line and slightly scale it down. From the top view. Okay, that's pretty close, I think. All right. Now just let's make some copies. Okay. You could make the whole thing in one step with the helix, by adjusting the turns and the height and radius, but maybe this is a bit easier to control the precise size of one turn. And then just attach them together. And select all vertices and let's weld them with a pretty low value. Make sure they are all set to corner. Okay, so here's the result. Looks pretty close. All we have to do now is fix this part over here. And we can try to do that manually with Edit Poly. Okay. Let's move it down. Scale it like this. Basically try to smooth out the transition. Okay. And you can chamfer this one. Like this. Select all the vertices and weld them at 0.1. And maybe chamfer this edge as well. And weld the vertices again. Okay, so that's pretty smooth. You can spend some time tweaking the shape if you wish, or you can leave it like it is. Okay, and same thing for the top part. And then just use the technique we saw earlier for this box, and this profile could be created with a simple profile with lathe modifier. Okay, so the helix tool is pretty useful for these spirals. Okay, so next thing I want to show you is how to create some fluted cuts like this here. Let's start with this same like we used before. The first thing we want to do is we want to twist it. But to twist it successfully, we need to add some segments over here. So right now, if you add edit poly and try to twist it, you can see that it messes up the object and the result is pretty bad. But if you add some segments here, you can add the twist modifier, set the correct axis, okay, first let's center the pivot point. And then let's try the twist modifier again. And as you can see, it twists pretty well. So what I would do next is I would add another edit poly, select one of the edge loops, and deselect these top and bottom parts. And create a line from this. So create shape, set it to linear. Enable in viewport and renderer. Maybe let's set rectangular, set it to 2 by 2. And add a turbo smooth modifier. Okay. Now let's make some copies with the array tool. And that's way too much. Okay, like this. Make sure they're set to instances. And I'm going to reduce the radius a bit. Okay. Let's isolate one of them and look at how exactly it looks. So we need to fix the ends with edit poly modifier. So let's remove this diagonal here and add another edge ring here by using the connect tool. And now when you add turbo smooth, you can see it's nice and rounded over here. And it's a bit too stretched out on this end, so I'm gonna add an edge ring here or edge loop here. Okay, like this. Right, let's isolate it, convert to editable poly. And add, and go to compound objects, pro boolean, and just pick these off like here, like I'm doing right now. Okay, so you can make some fluted spirals like this. Right, so another thing you can do is I'm gonna make a copy and show you. Okay, let's take this one out. And collapse back to editable poly. And another thing you can do is simply select these lines, loop them, and edit them directly. For example, I want to make this into some little cuts. Okay, like that. Let's ring and chamfer. And finally smooth. And you can get some interesting effects this way as well. Or if you wish, you can make an outwards extrusions as well. It's also very simple. Just select this ring and extrude outwards. Okay, I'm gonna increase the width to maximum and finally chamfer it also to maximum and increase the segments to make some nice rounded shapes. Okay, let's weld at 0.01 or actually even 0 is enough. Add another smooth modifier. And there you have it. So you can use all sorts of different techniques on twisted objects. All right. Okay, so for more detailed work, you can do it like this. I'm gonna make another copy of this object. And right now our original profile is very smooth. And what I want to do is I want to make it less smooth. So I'm gonna add some extra vertices here. So let's divide this in 2. Let's divide this in maybe 4. Again, this in 2. And these probably are enough with one division. Okay, and set all the vertices to corner type. And now, after using the light modifier, you have this rough result. For it to work correctly, you need to add some support vertices around the corners you want to keep hard after the light modifier. So a couple of support vertices here, here, and here as well. Okay, that's a bit weird, but alright. Again, just add some vertices everywhere you want hard edges after the lathe and turbo smooth modifiers. Just go over it quickly. Okay, and here's the result. You can see it's a pretty low-res mesh, especially if you decrease the segments. For example, let's set them to 16. And what you can do next is add an edit poly modifier. Add an turbo smooth modifier. And after turbo smooth, it looks pretty similar to this original, with one exception. This version is much more editable than this one, but the end result looks pretty similar. And I'm going to show you what you can do with this more advanced version. Okay, so first let's center the pivot point. Okay, good. And now let's collapse to editable poly. Select these polygons, press Ctrl I to invert and delete everything. Now we have this one little segment. Alright. Now using the array tool, we're gonna recreate the rest of the object. So we need 8 copies, since we have 2 segments here and we had 16 originally. Okay, looks like we need 16, sorry about that. Oh yeah, that's after turbo smooth, my mistake, sorry. Now let's get rid of that turbo smooth. And now collapsed editable poly. Sorry about that. Forgot I had turbo smooth on it. Okay, so select 2 segments, press Ctrl I. First let's make sure the pivot is centered. Okay, so it's centered. And delete all these other polys. Okay, now you have this rough segment left. Alright. Now when you use the array tool, you only need 8. And that's fine. Okay. Good. Right, and now what you can do is you can edit these pretty extensively. For example, I'm gonna add an edit poly modifier. And let's say I want some additional detail here. I'm gonna chamfer it first. And then I'm gonna select these polys and bevel them inwards. Okay, and maybe collapse them as well. And chamfer this resulting border. Okay. So what else? Maybe let's add another detail here. Maybe something a bit similar to. Okay, where was it? Maybe something similar to this part, but not exactly. But the same basic idea. So let's bevel it. Maybe rotate a bit. And let's add an edge loop along the outer perimeter over here. Alright, like this. And finally, let's try to extrude this inwards. Okay. settings were a bit wrong here. Looks like I messed up something here. Okay. Right, and let's chamfer this. Okay, and now we have all these details added to the model. We can isolate it, collapse to editable poly, and attach it back together. Select all the vertices, weld them, 0.01. And try on Turbo Smooth. And you have these bulbs here, these little circular cuts here, and these little vertical cuts over here. And as you can see, it's a pretty flexible method for adding some detail to segmented objects. Okay, so I think that's about it for turned objects.